Um, Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves briefly. So my name is Ben White. I'm the Federal Policy Manager, and I am also a stage 3 colon cancer survivor. I was diagnosed at 26.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly McDonnell. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy for Fight Colorectal Cancer. I currently live in Chicago, but I spent almost 10 years in Washington, D.C. I worked on Capitol Hill for the U.S. House of Representatives for a member of Congress from New Jersey for about 5 of those years. So was the person that you're going to be sitting across from next week, but really excited to meet all of you in person in D.C.
Hello, everyone. I am Olivia. I am the Grassroots Program Manager at Fight CRC. Super excited to meet the new newbies and the new advocates that I haven't met before, and excited to see some familiar faces. But yeah, excited to see you guys all and hear your guys' stories. But all those emails that you've gotten, those are all from me. So excited to finally put faces to names.
Yeah, likewise. I'm Cade Kratzer. I'm a very new member to the team. I started a few weeks ago. At this time, I'm super excited to meet everybody. I've seen everybody's names in a spreadsheet, so I'm excited to connect with you guys in person in just a few days.
Anything I'll round out on our side. Good evening or good afternoon, depending on where you may be dialing in from. My name is Sherry Orbig. I'm the State Policy Manager here. I and Cade and I actually similarly are have newly joined this team. I'm very much looking forward to meeting everybody and seeing this wonderful event from a different perspective, and hopefully be a constructive part of the effort and the many final results.
Thank you, everyone. So welcome to our Colon Congress training webinar. If you have questions as we go, please feel to enter them into the chat or the QA. Our team will do the best we can to answer them and monitor that as we're going. And hopefully we'll have some time for kind of like more of a projected like Q&A afterwards at the end. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So some of you may be longtime advocates, some of you, this may be your first experience with Fight TRC. So we want to make sure to kind of cover all of our bases here. So who are we? Well, we are Fight Colorectal Cancer. Our mission is to fight to cure colorectal cancer and serve as relentless champions of hope for all those affected by this disease through informed patient support, impactful policy change, and breakthrough research endeavors. And so as a Colon Congress attendee, we are specifically addressing that impactful policy change piece of this. And we are a grassroots organization, so that can only be done with folks like you, advocates, who are willing to reach out to their representatives, to reach out both locally and like you coming to Colon Congress, to come to DC and advocate. So we're super grateful for your support. This work can't be done without you. Everyone here is so critical to our mission. Let's talk about where we started. 2025 is Fight Colorectal Cancer's 20th anniversary, and next week you will all be joining us for the 19th Colon Congress. Now, it originally started with a much smaller group of very passionate advocates who were tired of not seeing change for the colorectal cancer community, and so they started going to the Hill. And you can see some of these, I don't want to call them historic photos, but photos from some of our early days, and it was a much smaller group. But over the last 19 years, we have grown quite a bit, and this year will be our largest Colon Congress ever. So this year, as of now, we are expecting 315 advocates from 40 different states. We are expecting over 140 first-timers, and these include 130 attendees who have identified as caregivers or loved ones, and 105 who have identified as survivors. And we are so grateful for all of you to be joining us and for your support, and we're so excited to meet you all in person next week. So I'm going to cover kind of the highlights of the agenda. It's a lot to cover, so I'll cover it at a pretty high level, but I do kind of want to walk through what you can expect. So the very first day is our United in Blue Volunteer Day, and some of you may not be arriving to DC in time to participate in these events, and that's okay. But for those of you who are here, we'd love to see you for as much or as little of this as you're able to make. So basically, starting at 9 a.m., we'll be out on the National Mall setting up our United in Blue installation. And this is our installation, which is behind me in this photo. And it is 27,400 blue flags, which go right in front of the Capitol. And those flags represent the number of individuals under the age of 50 who are projected to be diagnosed with colorectal cancer in the year 2030. So it's a really remarkable visual to anyone who's in the area, particularly our, politicians and leaders and lawmakers, to see the impact of this disease in its reality. So we'll be setting that up all day. But starting at 4 to 6, we will have a meetup for our LGBTQ plus and allies, and that's co-partnered with our friends from Cheeky Charity, and that'll be in the Monroe 1 building at the Hilton Arlington National Landing. And then from 6 to 8 p.m., early check-in begins with Call on Congress, and we'll have a mix and mingle event, and that will be in Washington 2 and 3 at the hotel as well. So that's Sunday. Moving on to Monday, we have a very packed day. So breakfast starts at 7:30 and training begins at 8:30, where we will welcome you into Call on Congress. Most of the morning we'll have kind of concurrent programming that is both advocacy one-on-one and more in-person training on some of the kind of things we're gonna cover tonight. And that will be going on at the same time as our junior advocates training in a separate room. We'll all come back together for lunch. And then afternoon is kind of a pick your own adventure. So we have several kind of presentations from some of our partners and other groups within Fight CRC. And those are going to be going on at the same time as our Research Expo, where we have a whole bunch of other partners presenting. They'll have booths where you can learn about a lot of our partner organizations, as well as different teams within Fight CRC and the different work that we do outside of just the policy advocacy work. And again, in that afternoon, we'll also have a junior advocate session. So depending on who you are and what you want to do, you can kind of mix and match, attend those presentations that interest you, and make sure you visit the Resource Expo. We'll have some Hill meeting practice between 3 and 4, and then have a little break before we head to the buses for our rally on the mall at the United in Blue installation. So the last bus will depart at 5 p.m. So make sure you head down before that so you can catch a bus out there for the event. You won't want to miss it. We're having a big rally. We'll have some of our congressional champions and other colorectal cancer advocates and partners kind of celebrating what we're doing this week. And then at 7:15, we will have the buses start returning to the hotel. It's worth noting dinner's going to be on your own this night. So if you're interested, it's a good time to maybe stay in DC and explore, get dinner in the area, walk the monuments at night. As a DC area local, I live just across the river in Alexandria now, but I lived in DC for several years. I love visiting the monuments at night. They have a very different and special glow at the evening. So whether you want to come right back to the hotel or kind of hang out in the district, that's up to you. And then that will kind of wrap up our day on Monday, our training day. And then Tuesday is our big day on the Hill. So we'll have breakfast beginning at 6 o'clock. The last buses will leave by 8 a.m. to head to the Hill. We'll take a photo all together in front of the Capitol at 9. And then we'll release everyone to go do your Hill meetings with all your members of Congress. And finally, we'll wrap up the evening with a celebration dinner to celebrate all of the hard work we've done over the last few days back at the Hilton Arlington National Landing. So a very packed 3 days, and we're really excited, like I said, to see a lot of familiar faces and meet a lot of new advocates. It's going to be a really great event. So what are the resources before Call on Congress? Well, we have our online training in Community of Champions. I definitely recommend taking a look through that, familiarizing yourself with those materials. We're going to present all of our training and our asks here on this webinar, and we'll do it again in person, but it's really helpful to be able to kind of go through those at your own pace. I'm a very visual learner, so when people present to me and talk to me, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. I prefer to be able to look through it. So if that's you, definitely get on Community of Champions and flip through that. This webinar will be recorded, so you can return to it. And we'll also have in-person Call on Congress trainings on that Monday, as I just mentioned. So let's dive into it. Advocacy 101. Why are we here? Why do we bring over 300 of us to Washington, D.C.? Why do we do this? Well, the reality is that there are a lot of things that need to be improved for our community, the colorectal cancer community, and that if we're not doing it, nobody's going to do it for us. So advocacy allows us to get in front of those who are the decision makers who are making these policies and to share our stories and demonstrate how important these policies are and the needs of our community. There are a lot of ways to get policy change done. There are lots of organizations, corporations, things like that, who might have whole teams, on staff that are on the Hill, every day of the week or whatever. But the reality is for the health space and for patients facing diseases, it often falls to us to rally together to make these changes. So it's an incredibly selfless thing to come and advocate for yourself, but also for others, which is what you're doing by coming to Call on Congress. But it's really, really important for our community. So we're grateful you're coming. I always take it back to that age-old saying you may have heard many times that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Every day, policymakers on Capitol Hill are making decisions that might impact colorectal cancer patients. So if we're not in the room, if we're not telling them what things are important to us, they might not have any idea how those decisions impact our community. So it's really important that we unite in our voices and share these issues with them. The key to advocacy, particularly grassroots advocacy, is nonpartisan advocacy. So we are a nonpartisan organization. We have partners on both sides of the aisle from all walks of life. And frankly, we will work with any policymaker who is willing to partner with us to make progress for colorectal cancer patients, families, and their loved ones. Colorectal cancer is a nonpartisan issue. Everyone is impacted by cancer, and colorectal cancer impacts every single state and district in the country. And we need advocates and champions in Congress to reflect that. So when we're here, we leave politics at the door. We're here to share our stories, talk about how this disease has impacted us, and talk about colorectal cancer. And remember that the rest of the community is relying on us. It's an incredible opportunity to be able to come in and speak to your lawmakers, and you are representing more than just yourself there. Not everyone is able to come to DC or knows about this program. And so we're here advocating on behalf of them as well. So really important to kind of keep that in mind and make sure that we are working to build any champions we can wherever we can. So let's talk about what is going on in DC right now. It is a very, very busy time on Capitol Hill. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more of the specifics of some of this later, but I want to give you a high level overview so we understand. And a lot of this is kind of important background knowledge to take into these meetings. So first thing that's going on, well, we had elections in November, so that means there's a pretty new Congress on the Hill right now. So in January, after the elections, a new Congress was seated, and this means a lot of things need to happen. So the first thing is that there are 63 new members of the House of Representatives and 12 new senators. This is a huge opportunity for us to get in front of these new members and educate them on colorectal cancer and how it's impacting Americans across the country, how it's impacting you. For many new members, they might be generalists in areas or might not necessarily have locked in exactly what issues they're going to champion yet. So this is a huge opportunity to share your story and build champions in Congress. Secondly, bills need to be introduced. Anything that didn't carry over from the last Congress, any bill that wasn't passed, has to be reintroduced, and the whole process needs to be restarted. And this is also the same for caucuses. So any caucus that existed in the 118th Congress, the Congress that lasted from 2023 to 2024, needs to be reformed, and all members who are interested need to rejoin. Also, what's going on is that there are two appropriations bills currently in process. So what are appropriations? Well, appropriations are how we fund the government. Every year, our federal government runs on a fiscal year that begins on October 1st. And so Congress has to create a funding bill that funds the government from October 1st to October 1st, a fiscal year. I'm going to get more into this process a little bit later and kind of the nuances of where we are in this process. But it's important to know that right now, Congress is working on wrapping up FY25, which we are about halfway through, but they're also beginning to work on FY26, which will begin on October 1st of 2025. It's also worth talking about appropriations because our primary ask is related to appropriations. Appropriations work is done by the Appropriations Committee. So not every single member has a hand in writing appropriations bills. And within the Appropriations Committee, there are 12 subcommittees that focus on specific areas. And these subcommittees build those specific bills for those specific areas. So for instance, there is, a health subcommittee and also a defense subcommittee. We'll get into the weeds in this in a little bit, but our primary ask will actually fall under the jurisdiction of the defense subcommittee. But it's still worth noting that you may visit a member who's a part of the health subcommittee, and there are other programs that they're responsible for writing funding bills for that affect colorectal cancer, the colorectal cancer community. So it's worth noting that as well. So our primary ask is going to involve an appropriation letters or form. So even if your member is not on an appropriations committee, they can still have an input in the appropriations process. And they do this by gathering support together as a group and sending letters into the appropriations committee. So if a large group of senators or members of the House of Representatives get together and have a lot of signees on a letter saying we support funding this issue at this level, the Appropriations Committee is much more likely to take that seriously into consideration as they work on their appropriations bills. So even if your member isn't an appropriations member, they still have a loud voice and you can make a big impact on these asks. So always worth keeping in mind. So, what is our first ask? For those of you who have been to a call in Congress before, you may be familiar with this ask. We are focusing on the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. What is that? Well, the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, or CDMRP, as I'm going to call it, because the full name is a bit of a mouthful, and that is the acronym that it's known by, is a research initiative within the Department of Defense, which is why we are thinking about defense appropriations committees. And it specifically funds medical challenges that are identified by Congress. It is congressionally directed. So it's a pretty unique research program for many ways. One is that it focuses on solutions that lead to more immediate outcomes. They are really looking at high risk, high reward research that might have a nearer time frame than maybe other research mechanisms that exist, like traditional National Institutes of Health or National Cancer Institute funding. A lot of what CDMRP is looking at is home runs that will be wins sooner rather than later for the community. Another thing that makes CDMRP pretty unique is that they include consumer advocates throughout the process. So in every review board, anytime there is a grant review process, there are consumer reviewers who get to sit as a part of those panels and bring the patient and caregiver perspective to those panels as far as determining what issues are most relevant and most important to the colorectal cancer community. I've had the opportunity to sit on 2 CDMRP review panels, and I know quite a few of our advocates who are returning to call on Congress this year will have as well. And a lot of those got their start through our RATS program, that's the quickest plug for, but you can learn more about our RATS program at Call on Congress. Another thing that's great about CDMRP is that they support both early career investigators as well as established scientists. So not all funding mechanisms offer great opportunities for researchers who are early in their career. Those grants can be harder to come by, but CDMRP does support early career investigators. So they're also basically supporting the future of cancer research in addition to those who are doing great research already. Why are we talking about this? Why is CDMRP so important? Well, if you're not aware, colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of cancer death for men and women combined. It is currently the #1 cause of cancer death for men under 50 and on track to be #1 for men and women under 50 by 2030. As you can see in these graphs, we have a little arrow pointing out this is the kind of average annual mortality of colorectal cancer. So it is a very high burden, as all of us are aware. That said, it is federally underfunded. We have been left behind, frankly. In 2020, the United States spent roughly 11% of all cancer treatment costs on colorectal cancer, yet CDMRP allocated less than 2% of its cancer research budget to colorectal cancer research. How is this the case? Well, colorectal cancer sits in this program called the peer-reviewed cancer research program. So while many other cancers, basically every single one on the screen that you see with a little star, they all have their own bucket of funding specifically that goes only to cancer research for that type of cancer. Colorectal cancer doesn't have its own program. It sits in the peer-reviewed cancer research program, and it competes with over a dozen other cancer types for a single bucket of funding. So when there's a really good colorectal cancer research application, it's not just competing against other good colorectal cancer research applications, it's competing against applications for over a dozen other types of cancer research. And so there's no guaranteed amount of projects that will be funded every year. There's no guaranteed amount of money that's going to be funded. And that's why it's really critical that we get our own program within the CDMRP. And because of this, while a lot of other cancers have seen major advancements in treatments and therapies, the standard of care for colorectal cancer is still FOLFOX for a lot of patients. And for those who aren't aware, 5FU was created in the 1980s. That's over 40 years ago now. It's highly toxic. A lot of the treatments that we have are highly toxic. And we have not seen the same gains that a lot of other cancers have because we've not had the same investment in federal research funding. So these are all reasons that this is a really, really critical program, but also a really critical opportunity for us to increase funding for colorectal cancer research. So the ask is that we are urging Congress to support $20 million to establish a colorectal cancer research program within the Department of Defense's congressionally directed medical research program. To support this ask, we have two champions, one in the House, Representative Nikema Williams, and one in the Senate, Senator Cory Booker, who are leading sign-on letters. So all of your members of Congress, both your senators and your members of the House of Representatives, can sign on to these letters in support of this ask. And hopefully we will continue to raise support and get this money funded to stand up a program. So I know we threw a lot at you with that. It seems my screen is frozen. But let's go over like what are the key things you should take away about this program? Oh, good. Okay, good. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties. All right. The key takeaways. We don't want you to get too caught up in the nuance of this being research, but Department of Defense. But like, what if I'm not a veteran in the military? At the end of the day, this is research. And while a lot of the research is, you know, can benefit service members and veterans, anything that's benefiting them is also benefiting every single person who's affected by colorectal cancer. So this is about research. This is about the fact that research has been federally underfunded for colorectal cancer broadly. A standalone program within CDMRP would save lives, and more research is more time for us in our community. So when you're taking this ask, try not to get caught up in the weeds of what the program is and how it fits in with other research. Think of it as research and what would more research and more options mean for you and for those you love who are facing colorectal cancer. All right, so that's our primary ask. That is something we're going to be taking to both our senators and our members of the House of Representatives. Let's jump forward to our next ask. Our second ask is to get this is an ask that's only for the members of the House of Representatives, but it's to join the Colorectal Cancer Caucus. So, no, okay. We are urging our members of the House of Representatives to be a champion for colorectal cancer and join the Colorectal Cancer Caucus. What is Colorectal Cancer Caucus? Well, the caucus is a voluntary, bipartisan coalition of members of Congress who are united in raising awareness and fighting colorectal cancer. Why do we do this? Well, every state, as I've mentioned, and every district is affected by colorectal cancer, and we need our champions in Congress to reflect that. And the more champions we have, the easier it is to rally Congress and decision makers around issues that are important to us as they arise. Excuse me. And these members are committed to representing you and leading the charge in the fight against colorectal cancer. So who leads the caucus? We have two co-chairs. Our Republican co-chair is Congressman Mark Green out of Tennessee. Congressman Green is a colorectal cancer survivor and also a physician. And our Democratic co-chair is Congresswoman Nikema Williams out of Georgia, and she is a caregiver, and her mother was diagnosed with early onset colorectal cancer. Both of these co-chairs have been incredible champions and advocates for our community. And we're really thrilled that they have taken up the mantle in this Congress to re-stand up the colorectal caucus. Why would somebody join the caucus? Well, the first reason is that they're representing you. It's a great way to, you are their constituent and they represent you. And this is a great way to support you in what you're going through and why you're here. But it also gives them access to invitations to events hosted by the colorectal cancer community, updates on legislative efforts. And like I said, the biggest thing is it's an opportunity to advocate for constituents who are affected by colorectal cancer. So as I mentioned, the caucus has to be reformed. So at the end of last year, the 118th Congress ended with 30 members in the colorectal cancer caucus. 25 of those 30 members actually returned to Congress. So 5 of them, for one reason or another, are not sitting members of Congress anymore. And the good news is that 14 of those 25 have already rejoined. So if your member of Congress is listed in orange here, it means they were a champion for the colorectal cancer caucus last year, and they've already rejoined for this year. So if you go to those meetings, make sure you're thanking them for their support. It's huge that there has been so much initiative on their end to already join, before Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month even started. If your member is in blue, that means that they have been a wonderful champion for us in the past, and we probably just need to nudge them to rejoin. And if you don't see your member of Congress, that means there's a huge opportunity to help us grow this caucus and continue to raise awareness. So what are the key takeaways and how do we join? The biggest takeaway is that we need champions in Congress to represent our concerns and our issues. And building a relationship is the best way to build support for colorectal cancer issues. So to join the caucus, your members can reach out to Chester Pelsang in Congressman Green's office. All right, so those are our 2 big asks. Now let's talk a bit about appropriations, because we are in a very tricky time in DC, and it's a very tricky time in the appropriations process. So first, let's talk about how appropriations works. So this might be a throwback to like Civics 101 that you took back when you were 16 years old. You may have literally never learned about appropriations or never thought about this or never wanted to learn about this. So this is going to be a crash course in how the government is funded. But the way government funding works, the way the appropriations process is supposed to work, and the timeline it's supposed to run on, is that most years in February, the president will release their budget. And this is a proposal that is how they think things should be funded, and they send this to Congress. And Congress takes a look at the president's budget and, weighs that against what they think their own priorities are, and uses this to kind of drive their thinking as they plan their bills. The Congressional Appropriations Committees meet in March, and first they decide their top line levels. So how much are we spending on healthcare this year? How much are we spending on defense? And once they agree on top line levels for each subcommittee, they divvy that up into all the programs that fall under those committees. So specifically within defense, how much is CDMRP getting? How much is hopefully a colorectal cancer program within CDMRP getting? And so all this happens in March, and then they get to drafting the bills. And this happens usually April, May, or it's supposed to happen in April, May. They create their bills, they vote on them as a committee first, and then they send them out to the rest of their chamber. So whether that's the Senate or the full House of Representatives, everyone votes on all the bills and gives them either a yay or nay. And assuming they pass, the bills have to pass both chambers, and if there's differences between the 2 versions, they have to be reconciled. I won't go into the weeds on that, but after everything's passed, it goes off to the president, who hopefully signs the bill and passes it. And then on October 1st, the funding gets implemented, and federal government takes that money and puts those programs to work. How does the actual congressional appropriations process work? Well, sometime between February and May, depending on the year, the president releases their budget. Congress will read it. they may take it into account or they may not look at it at all, because usually Congress really takes into their own priorities a lot more weight than the presidential budget as far as determining appropriations. Committees meet to decide top line spending levels. While a lot of times this work does begin in March, it often really drags well in through spring into maybe even early summer. And the bill drafting will also drag well into summer. Often, final bills get voted pretty much right before the deadline. So come September is when there are the real big efforts to actually pass these bills in Congress. And they don't always pass by September. So what happens if Congress can't come to a agreement on how to actually pass and fund these bills? Well, they can buy themselves some more time with what's called a continuing resolution, or a CR. And this is pretty common. Most years, in fact, I think every year in the past, like 20 years, there has been at least one continuing resolution. And a continuing resolution basically says, for a set amount of time, we are going to continue funding the government at the level we did the last time we passed a full bill, to buy us more time to work on an actual appropriations bill. So it's very common to see a 3-month continuing resolution come October that may expire towards the end of the year in late December. And a lot of times, late December is where you see this big end of year package where they basically lump all the appropriations bill into one big package. And a lot of times, a lot of other bills get lumped into that, and they basically pass one huge, what's called omnibus bill, where they just throw everything together and vote on it as one big, chunk together. So that's how it often really works. But let's talk about where we are this year, because we didn't get an omnibus at the end of the year. What actually happened was that on December 20th, the appropriations bill kind of fell through, and what we instead got was another continuing resolution. Now, that continuing resolution was a roughly 3-month CR, which expires on March 14th. And so if you're looking at the date, and you're looking at when we're on the Hill and you're thinking about all these things, you'll realize that that funding continuing resolution expires next Friday, which is 3 days after we're on the Hill. So because of this, it's going to be a very, very busy time, because all of the legislators, all the appropriators, and really everyone on the Hill is going to be talking about this bill and figuring out what to do about it and trying to wrap it up in the next 3 days. And so it's going to be a busy time on the Hill, because this is the bill that funds, basically we're halfway into FY25 already, but they do need a formal bill to kind of formalize a lot of programs that exist. Otherwise, it kind of just maintains, which can create some complications as far as the budget process. So while that's happening, offices are also actually starting work on FY26. So that's why there are kind of 2 bills in process. So a lot of appropriators, a lot of those thinking about the budget are still trying to stick to their normal timelines so that they don't start FY26 work behind. So while we are at that point where they're trying to wrap up FY25, they are also beginning to take requests and formalize both top lines and how things might shake out for the full bill for FY26. So despite it being a very hectic time on the Hill, because there's so much going on with both bills, it's also a really good time, because this is that critical time when offices are taking input and thinking about the next year's funding bill. So as we're asking about the CDMRP, we're specifically asking about FY26. To be totally honest, FY25 is pretty much baked in at this point. So whatever has been included is included in that point. And unfortunately, colorectal cancer did not get a standalone program in the early versions of those bills that were released, the ones that were kind of what do I want to call it? Like teased in September and in December. Early drafts of bills were released, and unfortunately, there was not a colorectal cancer standalone program in those, so we do not anticipate that there will be one in FY25. But again, that's why it's a great time to start looking to FY26, and the timing is perfect for us to be on the Hill while all these offices are beginning to kind of compile their priorities for that. So the big takeaway, it's a very busy time on Capitol Hill, but it's also still a really, really good time to be there and advocate for issues. And I think it's also worth noting other things that are kind of going on in DC. There is a lot of kind of quick changes that have been coming out of the new administration that may be a little bit more rapid than DC is used to seeing. And so there's been a lot of kind of knee-jerk reactions and things to a lot of things that have been coming. So I understand that there may be frustrations as far as on the Hill, as far as, a lot of the back and forth, and maybe with advocates that we see about things being funded, things being unfunded, things being frozen, things being unfrozen. At the end of the day, this is still a really, really important time to be here. Maybe it's never been as important to be here, advocating to your members of Congress because they're doing this work. And I just think it's worth kind of noting that there are a lot of other things going on in DC, but that doesn't impact the work that's going on in Call on Congress and the work that is going on Call on Congress. And it makes the work that we're doing out there as advocates even more important than ever because Congress is moving forward with their work as usual. So, why do we meet with lawmakers and what can we expect? The reason we all actually go to meet in person is because these personal meetings are one of the most effective ways to get any form of messaging across. At the end of the day, all of our elected representatives do remember that they are elected by us. They represent us. And whether your members of Congress are your favorite members you've ever had or your least favorite, they still represent you. And they always keep that in mind. And this is your opportunity to, like I've said, educate them and teach them about the things that are important to our community. And it's a huge opportunity to get in front of them. And a lot of times, there are so many issues that members can weigh in on. A lot of times they simply don't know. But when you get in front of them and you tell your story and you talk about how colorectal cancer affected you and your family and your loved ones, that is what they're going to remember. They're going to remember, oh, I met Michael and he told me this story about all the ways that colorectal cancer was awful. I want to support his family. And that's how we make change. And so it's really important. The biggest tool we have is us and our stories to get in front of them. And so that's why we do these meetings. So I'm going to turn it over to Olivia and take a little breather and a water break, and give you all a break from hearing my voice. And she will talk about sharing your story at Call on Congress.
Thanks, Ben. So I'm gonna just reiterate everything that Ben said. Your story is so powerful. So there will be time in DC to do more of this practice, but your personal stories put a face to the numbers behind every statistic is a real person. It's gonna be a patient, a survivor, a caregiver. So when we share our experience, we can make colorectal cancer impossible to ignore. We're gonna sit across a table and put that face to it. And so sometimes meetings can be short, but we are going to be able to dive in and really hone in on our story. So this is just a guide that we have found. And again, there's going to be more time in DC to practice this, but just a guide to craft your story and ready for your personal touches. And so I'll kind of walk through this and then we'll have Ben share an example. But in the beginning, this is the life before colorectal cancer. And this is going to help your listener see you as a person and not just a patient. But then a shift occurs, and this is a moment everything changed. Well, were there symptoms that you noticed? How were you feeling in that moment? But then there's the outcome, what you faced, how you've shaped it, and how it's shaped you. This is the hardest part. Maybe it's treatments or surgeries, but also what gave you strength? Was it family support, groups, advocacy? And then we end with power. We end with a call to action and why this should not be happening and why there must be change. And so looks like Ben has got his breath back. And so we can go to the next slide and yeah, then we can let him give an example here.
So here we have kind of an outline. Obviously, you're going to tweak this story to adjust yourself. You might not use this exactly. But as Olivia said, we have the beginning, the shift occurs, and the outcome. So I'll tell you my story like I tell it when I'm meeting with my members of Congress. So, hi, my name is Ben. I am a stage 3 colon cancer survivor, and I was diagnosed when I was 26 years old. Before colorectal cancer, I was a naval aviator. I spent my time flying helicopters, and I loved to play with my dog on the beach. And my days were filled with aviation and flying. I was living my dream. It was everything I wanted since I was a little kid. But everything changed when I was diagnosed. At first, I was misdiagnosed. It's really hard for early onset colorectal cancer patients to get a timely diagnosis. I was told it was constipation. I was told it was all sorts of things that were not cancer. But eventually, I had what was supposed to be an exploratory surgery, and I woke up from that with a stage 3 cancer diagnosis and a colostomy. And so that's when I knew something was very, very wrong. After my diagnosis, I went through 12 rounds of chemo, and I'm really happy to be celebrating 7 years cancer-free. But the hardest part was that my treatment left me with permanent neuropathy in my hands and feet. And this means that I am no longer safe in the cockpit. And the Navy, unfortunately, decided, you know, to part ways with me because I couldn't fly anymore. But I keep going because I don't want this to happen to others like me. We need a dedicated research program within the Department of Defense because colorectal cancer is affecting more and more young people like me every year. We need advancements in prevention, early detection, and treatment so that people like me have more time to spend doing the things they love and flying helicopters like I did. So this is just a little example of kind of how you can tell your story. Hopefully you caught that that was pretty brief. You don't have to spend 10 minutes to leave an impact on a lawmaker. And that's going to take me to the next point. We're going to talk about how these meetings go. Um, so there's kind of a general flow of meetings, but it's important to note that you might have a lot of people in your group. It might be just you and one other advocate. You might be meeting with your actual member of Congress. You might be meeting with a staff member. They might tell you up front that they only have 10 or 15 minutes. They might say, I've got 30 minutes, take your time. So it's kind of important to pay attention to these ahead of time and to plan ahead with the group you're going with in your meetings to make sure you're getting the most of the time that you do have. So first we walk into a room and we give our introductions. Hi, I'm Ben. I live in Alexandria, Virginia, and I am your constituent. Um, and then we share our story. It's always really, really important to reiterate who lives in the district. You may be in a team where you're visiting another district or another member from your state because you're the only one from your district and they're the only one from theirs. So it's important to note who the constituent is and to make sure that as we're kind of divvying up time, that the constituent has ample time to tell their story. Because that's going to be the most important thing for the lawmaker. They're always happy to hear everyone's story, so don't think that they don't want to hear your story. I've been in many meetings where I've not been a constituent, and they're always still want to hear stories, but we want to make sure that those who do live in their district are getting first shot at sharing their stories. So we share our stories. That is the first most important thing we do. But if we're only sharing our stories, we're not helping the larger community other than raise awareness, which is very important. But we do have these policy asks. We want to make sure you're also getting to the policy asks. So you want to keep a close eye on time and make sure that you're able to give appropriate time to those policy asks. And when we end, we ask for support. We don't want to just present them with these things. We want to present them and say, can I count on your support? Will you sign on to this letter? Will you join the Colorectal Cancer Caucus? We will dive more into how to deal with pushback and things like that at the in-person training. But it's just really important to remember that we don't want to just kind of present things and walk away. We want to ask them to take an action. And at the end, we say goodbye and thank you. And if they are amenable to it, ask for a photo and get a strong arm selfie and post that and spread awareness on social media. So a few things to talk about. Oops, I got ahead of myself. And so as we're kind of thinking about our congressional meeting throw, it's also worth considering that there's going to be a difference between your meetings for some of you, your group size with your senators and with your members of the House of Representatives. Each state only has 2 senators, while House of Representatives are more proportional. So a state like California has over 50 representatives in the House of Representatives. Is that right? Is that number right? I think it's right. Thank you for the nods on my team. So, if you live in a state like California, there may be many representative offices to visit. So you may be in a smaller group there. There may just be 2 or 3 of you. But when you go to your senator offices, a lot more of you may be there to the point where not everyone may be able to share their story. So it's important. We'll give you time at Call on Congress to kind of meet with your state groups ahead of time. But it is important to plan for these meetings, plan who's leading what asks, who's going to primarily tell their stories. Because for some of these, like we have a huge Texas group this year, big shout out. There are a ton of advocates coming from Texas. And so frankly, even if each of you only took 30 seconds to tell your story, I think you would run out of time very quickly in a short meeting. So you'll meet everyone ahead of time who's coming from your state. You'll meet them all on Monday. You'll have time to get together as a group and plan all this out. But I'm just saying this to make sure that you are thinking about that in advance of kind of planning timing and making sure that you figure these things out and work them out with your team ahead of time. So who will you meet with? Some of you will get to meet with your members of Congress. They always want to meet with their constituents, but the reality is that they aren't always able to take every constituent meeting because of other job responsibilities like committee work or voting or hearings that they might have to sit on. So in these cases, your team will likely meet with your member of Congress's legislative staff. These staffers may seem young, but they are subject matter experts. Each staff member has a specific portfolio of subject areas that they're responsible for overseeing and helping advise the member of Congress on. And members of Congress take their input very seriously. Members of Congress really have to rely on their legislative staff to provide inputs and guidance because every member cannot be an expert on every single subject area. They have to lean on their staff to do that. So even if you're not meeting with the member themselves, you have a huge opportunity still to have the member's ear by meeting with these staff members. I mentioned earlier, you might get some pushback. You might hear things like, you know, I don't support disease-specific legislation. There are lots of diseases that want their own funding. Why should I share? Why should I support fight colorectal cancer? Excuse me. Why should I support colorectal cancer to receive its own program? And we're going to help kind of prepare you with how to deal with this pushback. But the biggest thing is to stay tactful, stay polite, and always bring it back to colorectal cancer, to your story and why you're there. Colorectal cancer is the only cancer in the top 5 without a program. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking to be treated like all of these other cancers who have a really high disease burden. They might ask you something spicy like, if you want me to fund your program, what should I cut? Don't bite on that. That's not our job. That's not why we're there. Our job is to say, I'm here to request support for colorectal cancer issues. I will leave all those offsets, all those other decisions to the professionals. But we would just love your support in supporting colorectal cancer issues. So, like I said, we'll go over more of these kinds of things at Colin Congress. They'll be in your training manual, but these are things to prepare for in those meetings. And what else can you expect? You may meet in an office, but you may meet in a hallway. If you're in a meeting in the House of Representatives, those offices can be very small. Don't take it as a slight if you have to take a hallway meeting. It might be literally that there aren't enough chairs in the office to seat you all. And they are some of those offices are pretty cozy. So you may be meeting in a cozy corner of an office. If you're in a Senate meeting, you may actually get a conference room, a big comfy conference room to sit in. So kind of just go in, be ready to expect either. Don't be offended if you have to take a hallway meeting with the staffer. That doesn't mean they're prioritizing you any less. It probably just means that there is not physically space for you to meet in the office. The member may sit through the whole meeting, they may not show up, or they may kind of pop in for like handshakes and to hear your stories and then pop out to go attend other business. So be ready for anything. I have certainly sat in meetings where the member wasn't supposed to be present, but heard advocates sharing their stories and popped in because they, left another meeting because they wanted to hear stories. So kind of be ready for all of these. But again, don't take it as a slight if the member isn't able to join. It doesn't mean that they are not that there's not a possibility of them becoming a great champion for colorectal cancer. Staffers are very young. Some of them are pretty newly out of college, but again, that doesn't mean they are not experts in the spaces that they oversee and that they do not hold tremendous weight with their bosses. The offices will be busy. There will be people coming and going. There may be other groups taking meetings. And I know for a fact that this is going to be a very busy week on the Hill. We are not going to be the only advocacy organization on the Hill. So there's going to be a lot of people coming and going. So just be prepared for that. You might hear a very alarming loud bell. This means that it's time to vote. It's probably going to catch you by surprise. It'll make you jump. But when you hear it will sound different than a fire alarm when you hear that loud bell, and it is a voting bell. And as I already mentioned, the House offices are significantly smaller, which is why sometimes you might take those hallway meetings. So what's the biggest takeaway about all this stuff we've talked about how to go into a meeting? If you remember nothing else, remember that your story is the most powerful tool you are taking to these meetings. That said, please save time for the policy priorities. Always be polite and respectful, but remember that your members of Congress represent you and do work for you. Finally, be mindful of time and make sure that the constituents lead. One last thing we'll mention, Soapbox is an organization, a company that we use to help us schedule all your meetings. So tomorrow you should be receiving an email from Soapbox with a tentative schedule. Soapbox is really convenient because you don't have to download an app. They'll send you links that will take you right to their like web application. Keep an eye on the schedule. The emails will say all this. They can change all the way up to literally the morning of, as far as timing, location, who you're meeting with, things like that. Those again, so look for something from Soapbox. I think it's, if I'm correct, Megan should be sending the emails this year. It will be like Megan at Soapbox. So keep an eye out for those. You will get physical copies of your schedules as well. But if you're curious as to who you're going to be going meetings with, other advocates, things like that, all that will be listed in that initial Soapbox email. You'll be able to dive into the platform and see when your meetings are currently scheduled for and who will be joining you for those meetings. So, finally, what to do between now and Calling Congress. We have less than a week, and we are so excited to see you. But if you want to refresh on more of this, as I mentioned earlier, the Community of Champions training has written information about all of our asks and more detail on all of those things. So you can get that on the Community of Champions and the Calling Congress page. And we also have a more broad advocacy training, which if you want to kind of refresher on what does Congress do? How does that work? What is advocacy? You can look to that training as well. I would also suggest looking up your members. If you don't know who your members of Congress are, you can look that up at congress.gov. You can put in your zip code and it will literally pull up who's your member of House of Representatives and who are your senators. And so in addition to looking up who they are, it's not a bad idea to do a little background. Do they live in the same town that you live in? Did they go to the same high school or junior high or university as you? Do they have hobbies? Do they play sports that you're interested in? Any of these things where you can find common ground may help you kind of get your foot in the door and be a little more memorable, in addition to obviously you will be memorable for sharing your story. But these are all nice things to know. And sometimes you'll be doing this research and you find that they may have a personal connection to colorectal cancer. They may be a survivor or have a loved one who was diagnosed. And so these are things you can all kind of arm yourself with that might make your meetings a little easier or help you get that foot in the door. If you want, you're welcome to rewatch this webinar if you haven't heard enough of my voice over the last hour or so. And the last thing to do before Calling Congress is to get excited. It is such an incredible event. It is really an amazing time to connect with other folks in the community who really understand what you're going through, who understand why you're coming out there. And so in addition to all the incredible advocacy work we're doing, it's really a wonderful time to meet others in this community. So we have a few minutes. I think our team did a pretty great job of answering Q&A in the chat. But if anyone has other questions, we have a few minutes left. We're happy to kind of try and field those as we can. I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing. We'll put our team back up. And yes, Paula put a great comment in the chat. You can also meet your advocates, your fellow advocates ahead of time on the Community of Champions app. If there are no questions, feel free to leave. We are so excited to see you in just a few days. Our team has been working very hard on this, but the best part of it is going to be when you all arrive and we all get to hit the hill together.